Okay, I'll just introduce it real quick. I'm Ryan Brown, and this is the Unvarnished podcast, and today we're visiting the home and office space of Peter Trippi, the editor of Fine Art Connoisseur, author of several books, including my favorite one I've seen on Waterhouse.
Waterhouse.
I can't believe I didn't bring it to have you sign it.
I've got it right there.
And so many other things I'm excited to get to know. I'm not even sure when we first met, but or where, or
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I've gotten to that point in life where it's all a blur.
It's all a blur. Yeah, yeah. For you, I mean, you're in the writing world, the art world, but your art world expands, I think, much broader than mine. So I'm very interested in hearing a lot of your insights on what's going on with the academic atelier world, with figurative representational art in general. You cover such a wide spectrum. And so I'm really excited to hear that perspective.
I'm delighted to see you here. Welcome to New York, and let's have fun. Let's talk.
Yeah. So if you could just give me, I don't know a whole lot about your history. Are you originally from New York? When did you come here? How did you get into writing, becoming the editor? Sure. If you want to just kind of paint a broad historical picture for us.
Gladly. Yeah, I love to talk about myself, like so many people. It's a fairly simple story, I guess. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I loved growing up there because it is a city full of great museums. And I was lucky that my mother worked at the Smithsonian Institution and the National Gallery of Art.
Wow.
So I was able to go visit those places, which are free, by the way. You don't ever have to pay. So I was able to just pop in often while visiting her and see things and just be very comfortable around art and history and science and museums generally. And that was a great blessing. I mean, it was a wonderful place to grow up. I don't desire to live in Washington anymore, but still, it was nothing but gratitude. And I feel that gave me not only an eye early on, because I was looking at a lot of things even if I didn't understand them, but also to realize there are real people working in museums who actually think about this stuff. It's not just the guards and the ticket takers. It's everybody else behind the scenes who make those shows happen and care for the art and other things, like natural history specimens. I mean, I was kind of interested in everything. I actually did an internship at the Air and Space Museum, believe it or not, because it's the greatest museum of its kind in the world, and it's the most popular museum in the United States. Full stop.
Really?
I mean, it's crazy how many people they
that.
get because, there it is, it's free in the middle of Washington. So that was kind of fun. Basically, I went to college at William & Mary in Virginia, and I studied history and art history, basically double major, even though technically one was a major and one was a minor. And that was useful for me because I feel like you can't possibly understand history without visualizing it through art and photography, that you need to see the people you're learning about. So, for example, just one example, I love the idea that if you're going to talk about Louis XIV at Versailles and how badass he is when it comes to, running an empire and telling everybody to kowtow to him and building a palace full of luxuries, you need to see a portrait of him in all of his getup.
Right.
I mean, that's all you need to know. I mean, he is just not messing around here. He is the Sun King. So you can read the word Sun King, but when you see the portrait, you say, oh, he's the Sun King. That's how you teach history. Use the art as a tool. So I loved that. I was so blessed to have that mix in my life. I kind of put it together myself in a way.
So when you were growing up and all of the exposure to the art and the accessibility to it, it sounds like you were responding to kind of this broader scope of what a museum is, rather than, blocking everything out and saying painting, sculpture. So were you ever thinking, did it ever occur to you to be an artist, or you're thinking about the broader curatorial sort of management of the art?
That's a good question. No, artist, never, because I am so clumsy. I've tried at different points in my life to do more than stick figures, and it's not good. So I just think don't bother. The world is better without my trying.
Yeah.
But I've done enough to know how hard it is.
Yeah.
And that's important for any critic or historian to appreciate. That, I can't do it, but I also can't dance and leap. And, that's why you go to the ballet and see the professionals do it.
Right.
The other thing here is you're quite right about context. It's not art only. It's all material culture. That science and history objects are just as valuable and insightful about life, about the past, about the future. Air and Space Museum, right? I mean, nothing, well, a few works of art in there, but mostly it's a bunch of rockets.
Right.
They're amazing.
Yeah.
And they are part of our story. And so I wanted to be around them for a while, for museological reasons, really, more than for the subject. I think one exciting example of what I think, in retrospect, changed my life was there's something called the Arts and Industries Building on the National Mall. It's right next to the castle of the Smithsonian, the original building from the 1870s. At that time, when I was a kid, it was installed as a recreation of the Philadelphia 1876 World's Fair. It was full of everything. It had locomotives and works of art. It had fabrics, and it had chairs, and it had ethnological specimens and dinosaurs. And it was like, oh, all of this is legit.
Yeah.
I mean, the World's Fairs, up until our time, were incredible because they were places where everyone would come and look at everything.
Everything. Yeah,
Everything.
Broad scope.
What a gift.
Yeah, materials.
And we don't really have that anymore. We're also specialized.
Yeah.
You go to a museum exhibition of art, but you don't go to a science exhibition.
Yeah.
I don't mean you personally, but many of us don't.
Right.
But that was a chance for everything to be on view.
Yeah.
And I thought that, in retrospect, was kind of wonderful that I stumbled into that.
Yeah.
The building is still standing, but it's used for other things now.
Yeah.
Also, another piece of this is that I was privileged to be born to 40-year-olds, their first and only child. So I was taken to places as their companion that other children might not get to go to.
Yeah.
Because they were grown-ups and they were looking for example, a trip to Europe.
Right.
Or a trip to a fine restaurant or an art gallery. So I benefited from that, and I'm grateful to my parents for offering that. So we went to London when I was 7, and I became an Anglophile immediately because I just thought, Buckingham Palace, that's so cool.
Right.
And sure enough, I ended up falling in love with British art. I was studying as an exchange student in St. Andrews in Scotland for a year during college, and I stumbled upon the PreRaphaelite painters of the mid-19th century, and I just thought, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because they were cool, wild, young guys. And I thought, oh, I want to learn more about them because they're so colorful and romantic and a little deranged. And, that appealed to my 20-year-old self. And I thought, let's go with that.
At that time, I know in Paris, a lot of the culture is, I guess they consider themselves very forward-thinking, and they do love their tradition. But there's also an undercurrent, it seems, and maybe this is just my perception, but an undercurrent of sort of disdain for the Bouguereaus and the Jeromes and some of their, cultural icons from the past. They look at that art as a bit passé and trite, maybe. Yeah. So when is the same? Does that exist in Great Britain for the PreRaphaelites? When you stumbled on them, was it out of favor? Were you fighting against something when you found a love for that, or was it very much in vogue still and people were on board?
Great question. I was lucky that I was looking at that art in 86, 87 at a time when the major Tate Gallery exhibition of PreRaphaelites had just run in 84. So Britain had reawakened to its heritage in that zone. So it was cool again.
Okay.
So I was lucky that it wasn't dismissed, that the teacher delivered the lecture.
Yeah.
It was a professor. I can't remember which one it was anymore, to my shame. But the point is that it was there as part of the canon of British art, and it was treated with respect.
Yeah.
So that was a great joy. However, you're right. The Victorians, beyond the PreRaphaelites, like Alma-Tadema or Waterhouse, were not taken as seriously at that moment. They were in vogue again with collectors because they were cool pictures and cheap, but they were not
cheap. Isn't that amazing?
They were cheap. Oh, believe me, they were cheap. If only I could get my hands on one now.
Right.
But those were not quite there yet. It took until the 90s for those artists to come back into full respect. in terms of the scholars and the critics. But you're right. The British were ahead of the French in that regard because that pre-Raph thing had happened at the Tate. And there was already a kind of groovy factor. A lot of music and pop rock stars were in that zone. Like, believe it or not, Mick Jagger, Rod Stewart, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Tim Rice, Jimmy Page, Brian May from Queen were buying that stuff. So there was a kind of Carnaby Street hip reverse chic aspect to that work, which was part of why Tate did the show in the first place in 1984.
Yeah, interesting.
So that helped me get into the groove.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know Kip Forbes had a number of them. I don't know if he got into that that early, but it's so interesting. I've heard Vern Swanson.
Yes.
He tells stories about an a big almatatum that was found in an alleyway or something and sold for $600 or
totally.
And now it's worth millions. 6-7 million. Yeah,
and Vern was out there in front. Certainly, what a great scholar and
he did the catalog raisonné on almatatum. You did the book on Waterhouse, not official catalog raisonné, but a great book
biography. Thank you.
And have you done books on any of the others?
Not in that zone in terms of a monograph like that. In 2016, I produced a catalog that is essentially a book with Liz Pretjohn, who teaches at the University of York. We've co-curated a lot of things together on Alma-Tadema, Vern Swanson's favorite artist. This was a project that toured an exhibition focused on his studio homes and his life with his family and the way that those interiors that they created together influenced the art we love today that he and the family members made. So that's a different take on an artist. It's not a monograph, just straight ahead. I'm very interested in studio houses, and I love the fact that your program is interested in space.
Yeah,
like this room, I mean, that's cool because it's how people live.
Right. It's fascinating to me to visit different artist studios, see how they set them up, what kind of lightings they use, their windows, their libraries. It's such a beautiful insight into the working mental process, the clutter, all of it is just part of our daily existence.
Right. And just a sidebar, the magazine Fine Art Connoisseur is launching just now a series of articles about studio houses, looking at past masters first, and then hopefully living masters in the future. We're big on something called the Historic Artist Studios Network, I think something like that, which is run by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. There's a network of 50 or more historic houses around the country, ranging from Georgia O'Keeffe to Gary Melchers to John F. Petto, where those houses are preserved, where the artists actually worked, and we're starting to highlight them one by one because we think that, when you see the master's work in the museum, that's just the result.
Yeah.
When you see the studio and the paintings or sculptures mixed in, you're like, oh, that's the window they were looking through.
Yep.
Or that's the floor where the splatter got left behind.
Yeah, I've been to the Thomas Cole House in the Hudson River Valley and Frederick Church.
Right across the river.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I know Maynard Dixon down in southern Utah is pretty amazing. They've got a nice gallery there, and they I don't know if they're, probably not through the pandemic, but they did have an annual exhibition there, which was great. And there's, I think on Instagram, I follow a page called, or maybe it's Facebook, Historic Artist Studios, and they're always posting images of amazing, amazing places. And I've had this in the 19th century, it seems to me that every major city in Europe would build townhome rows that were specifically designed for artist studios. North Light, some of them were live-in, some of them were just working studios. Florence's Piazzale Donatello. Is it Tite Street in London?
Exactly.
A lot of them had studios. And my thought was, what happens is artists move in and you get that for maybe between 50 and 80 years, and then they turn them into very luxury apartments, right? Because the light is so nice. But my my one of my dreams is to buy a city block somewhere and build that, have sort of like a Society of Illustrators library that with a eatery and have it be a little private club, but have an area where people would move from all over the world to have the light, the access to the community. I just worked with the Utah Valley University has a new architecture program, and it's centered on classical architecture. And they just redesigned 9 city blocks in Springville, where I live. Right. Theoretically, I mean, it's they redesigned it completely to build a 9-block radius art center around the Springville Museum. Wow. And so I got to kind of help critique that in the artist studios, and it's just I'd love to see that happen again.
Here's a tip that I hope you'll spread, and I'm going to do my best to spread it too. New York City, which they say is the art capital of America, but is a moving target these days because people have moved around the country for all sorts of reasons, especially in the last 2 years. This city is facing a giant shortage of demand for office space. We have all these towers, all of these buildings that are commercial zoning and are not going to be needed because people are working from home or they've taken their jobs elsewhere. Right. Let's turn them into cultural spaces. Yeah. Let's have those landlords get incentives to renovate them into a place where creative people can be together, as you described. Now, it may not be a house, because after all, a lot of these are office blocks. Sure. But they can be reworked to be creative hubs. And in my opinion, New York City's only chance of surviving this crazy time we live in is to reaffirm its role as a cultural magnet. Yeah. Let's bring everybody back. From Philadelphia, from Providence, from the suburbs, from the Hudson Valley. Not that those places are bad. Yeah. But we need a capital of art making. And I'm talking visual art, dance, theater, all of that.
Yeah, and if you can have a central hub or a building that has a lot of that, you get a lot of interaction, interdisciplinary interaction, which it used to happen all the time. The writers are hanging out with the painters are hanging out with, I read, I always bring this up, but Edwin Austin Abbey's biography is so great. But it talks about how, Sargent would be painting and Al Matata would be critiquing him and Wagner would be playing music in the background and on and on and on. And I'd love to see something like that. I love, I know Alexi Steel in California. He's got, I don't know, again, with the pandemic, everything's kind of been put on hold, but he used to do what he called the classical underground. Yes. And he had a really, I think he probably still does, has a huge studio warehouse space, and he'd bring in legitimate, very serious LA Philharmonic performers, and they do a quartet for maybe 45 minutes, donate their time, and he'd have art in the background, and then, actors would come out, and it was just maybe 300 people, kind of pretty quaint, intimate, but amazing. And New York would obviously, so many people, so much talent, it would be amazing. You could do something like that. It seems to me you could do something like that with very little effort if you had the space. Exactly. Because creative people crave the interaction. We're more than happy to share our time and our abilities and, do a little painting demo while somebody's playing music and have people watching. It's just as fun for us as it is for anybody else. So
that's it. Well, here's the kicker, that so much in the visual arts has been monetized, that there's this obsession with what's it worth. Yeah. And that tires me out. I just don't cover that world in the magazine. I'm not interested in seeing that stuff or checking it out online, which is more likely. And you're right. That sharing is still there in our people. Yeah. But it's been overridden by the desire to turn everything into a profit. Right. And so we can work on that, because I think New York City governance, including our new mayor, who seems very bright, need to step it up if we're going to keep the crown. Yeah. And so I'm not trying to pick on New York, and I'm not trying to say it's the only thing in town, because certainly we've seen examples of Detroit taking off like a rocket, Denver. Places are really hopping culturally, and they should, because we are a big country. We can't have it all in one city. That's stupid. It's not like London in England. It doesn't work like that. We have too much space between us. But I think that is one very cool way to go in any city in America.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of office space in Denver.
Right.
That's not going to be reoccupied soon.
Yeah. I mean, there's
come
a warehouse that was turned into artist studios. People just sublet, you just section off in Salt Lake. And I think they've got a 4-year waiting list to try and get a studio space there. And it's not particularly swanky. It's just a space where you can communicate and have a community of people, and people crave that. And so, yeah, I'd love to see it. I think, I've thought about trying to mimic that Alexi Steel thing, because again, it's so easy to do with creative people, to reach out to a violinist and say, would you want to come play for an hour? Yeah, I'll come play for an hour. Right. I remember I interviewed Max Ginsberg yesterday, and before we started, I was setting up, and he said, and tell me, what's in this for you? And I was like, what do you mean? What's in it for me is I get to sit down with you. I get to see your space. I get to hang out. I haven't found a way to monetize this. I doubt I ever will. I don't really care. I just genuinely enjoy sitting down and talking to people. And every time I travel and get to hang out with people, I always think, how would I share that? How do I tell people, as I walk through your beautiful apartment, I think, how would I explain the magic of the place? Well, maybe I could show it if I hit record and record these things. So, and I think there's a lot of people like that out there in the creative fields that just genuinely crave the interaction, and it doesn't always have to be monetized.
Here.
So yeah, I'd love to see that happen.
And thinking of historical precedents, I was talking about the studio network that exists in the U.S. There's also a version in Europe that is up and running. Of course, there's that long tradition of French museums devoted to individual artists,
right,
and often in the buildings where they lived.
Yep.
I am interested in the fact that Waterhouse lived for a long time in a community in Primrose Hill in North London. And it was, as you say, one of those purpose-built complexes with North Light. And there were amazing people there.
Yeah.
Not just the male painters, but also their wives or sisters or whatever, who were involved and creative and posing, and in some cases making art too, like Waterhouse's wife, who painted flowers. That is so understood in the world of historians. Why not let's transfer that to the present? There's a strong link there that we can point to and say, great work came out of that moment. Why not replicate that here?
Yeah.
And it can be profitable ultimately to the landlords too.
Oh,
it's not like they're going to lose money. I mean, it's just a question of making that change.
Well, yeah, it's a difficult thing, because I think if you repurpose a space, well, especially in New York, rents are so astronomically high. If you repurpose a space, or if you actually build what they used to, these particularly purposeful spaces, you are renting it to artists, and so rent can't be too high. So when you're talking about monetization and real estate, it wouldn't necessarily be the most profitable, say, as if you did luxury apartments, but you would be responsible for creating. And this goes back to what we were kind of talking about earlier: a space where the community builds on itself, where the interaction of artists is so much easier based on just location, that their collaborative efforts are inevitable. I talked to one of my reasons I kind of looking to move relatively soon, and one thing I'm looking for is an area that has a good art population, or artist population, because I crave the community. I'm just desperate to be surrounded by great minds and great talents. But in most places that have that large artist community, the culture is a little different than it was in the 19th century, in that they don't necessarily get together that often. They don't specifically get together for the purpose of critical review, as a system of checks and balances for one another. And I think one of the reasons for that, especially in New York, is it's so damn hard to get anywhere, right? I mean, it's a very busy, hectic city where everything takes a little bit longer, and so to trudge 40 minutes over to your friend's studio to tell them how to fix their painting isn't as appealing. But if you can create a hub like they had, these row of townhomes, you just go next door, have a drink and chat it up.
Much easier.
And I think that's probably one of the things that has created this culture of kind of locking yourself in your own tent and just doing your own work, is the proximity issue is a real issue.
Well, I was pleased last week to observe a critique on Zoom that was run by New York Artists Equity Gallery on the Lower East Side. I'll be leading that critique next month with Patty Watwood, looking at figurative art.
Yeah.
And I was just watching my colleagues do it for abstract art last week, and it was exciting because that's a classic critique where the images come up and the artist says some words about them, and then we the critics, talk about it. Zoom is not satisfactory for that, but it's as good as we can do right now based on the crazy situation we find ourselves in. That should be a normal thing in our field, that kind of get-together, and not just with a particular art school, but across the field. I mean, and your idea of event, which Alexi has done, as you say, for many years, sure, in a hub with space, that can be done. I mean, some of these office buildings have giant atriums.
It's huge,
where you could repurpose
That'd be amazing.
Right. So I think the key of going to Department of Cultural Affairs in New York City and saying, hey, we have a thought, try working on that with the developers, because they ultimately are facing zero income and maybe a few tax benefits, but perhaps they would get better ones if this vision were executed in concert with DCA and the artists themselves. So anyway, I don't mean to go down that rabbit hole too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me, and I'm very interested in seeing what I can do to help make that happen, because again, I'm deeply motivated by my need for community. I feel like I have it in me to be really good, but I need other people to help me get there. I don't know that I can achieve it on my own. So I just, for my own sake, and from selfish standpoint, I'm craving, the help of other people.
Dialogue. Yeah. Good.
Well, and that leads me to wondering, as you talk about, this critique session, one of the things I've noticed, and maybe I'm just not in the right circles, but is there's not a lot of critique, or the very clear, concise, brutal, straightforward critique, especially of the representational, figurative world. When I've read critiques or show reviews, it's typically just glowing praise. I've talked to some art historians and some writers and some critics who have, Vern Swanson for one, who have said, my job is to just put a spotlight on the art, not to necessarily criticize it. I think Micah Christensen may have had a similar feel that his job isn't to necessarily say what's wrong with it, but just say it's here and look at it.
Okay, so that's the zeitgeist. I just went to a panel discussion recently in New York looking at art of all kinds, and the same complaint was made by two leading critics, one from the New York Times, one from the New Criterion, that we've lost in our society the desire to criticize. We only praise or highlight the good. Now, that's a lovely and humane thing to do. It means that those who have the potential to get better but haven't quite hit the grade yet don't get talked about at all, and therefore are invisible in the literature. And also that there is a fear of lawsuits. We live in a very litigious society.
Yeah.
And I think that now, as we witness, for example, debates over authenticity of historical works, where a scholar puts his or her head above the parapet and gets sued.
Yeah.
And that has just recently been changed in New York State, so that you're no longer liable.
Yeah.
But in other states, you will get sued
by
a billionaire collector or by an auction house if you say it's fake. I mean, it's high stakes.
Wow.
You could lose your home.
Oh, boy.
So that culture of litigation
Yeah.
has permeated the art world too, in terms of contemporary art.
Yeah.
Because people then will troll you on Instagram
Yeah.
or Twitter and say, you are so mean.
Yeah, sort of.
How dare you?
Kind of a part of that cancel culture
Right.
mentality.
Anything negative. And so we live now in a world of public relations firms only telling you lovely things about
Yeah.
everybody all the time. And you just sort of borrow that and take it forward. Now, I'll be honest with you. With my magazine, I have consciously until now, maybe this is a new day, you and I talking about this, we have emphasized the positive and ignored the stuff we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Because we would rather devote the energy and the space to showing good stuff.
Yeah.
But I hear you loud and clear. There may be a place, a forum, where negative gets put across because it actually does some good.
Yeah.
That people can grow through commentary that is not mean-spirited,
Right.
but is insightful.
Yeah, insightful, constructive. I think when I read, you have the salons of the 19th century, and if we were to walk through there today, it would. I mean, who's working at that level? Consistently. There's not hundreds of artists all working at this insane level, so it would blow us away. But there's some significant criticism that has been written about those shows every year. You had significant critical feedback, and it was so on point. I mean, you've read it, I'm sure.
A lot.
They were able to break down a painting so brilliantly, and a lot of the critics were painters.
Yes.
They wrote about it so eloquently, and all of it was meant to elevate the art. And that was the whole point. So, it isn't negative to offer that feedback. It's meant as a positive. Let's take a look at what you're doing and let's see how we can improve. Go back to the drawing board, apply those principles, refine yourself. And that's the community I'm looking for. Is tell me what I'm consistently missing. Tell me what I'm consistently doing that might be a little bit awkward or clumsy, because my whole point is wanting to get better. I mean, it does hurt to realize that other people are aware that you're not perfect. But unless it's pointed out, you could remain ignorant of
Right.
the deficiencies in your work. And
It's
that's
silly.
where I feel I'm at, is I'm sure there's a lot that I'm just ignorantly, consistently doing. Awesome. And I think I'm capable of understanding how to overcome myself. But it is rare that even among friends that they would
Right.
offer that
To go that next
critical
step.
review. Yeah.
Well, to your point about the 19th century literature, absolutely. There were so many outlets writing about art in Paris, London, New York, and so on. We forget that there were 10 newspapers in New York active every day in the 19th century. Now we only have, 4, if we're lucky?
Yeah.
And one of them is useless. So the idea that was a rich landscape of commentary, that they were all going to have to say something if they were going to stay in business.
Yeah.
They had to have an opinion.
Interesting.
And also, I think people had thicker skin.
Yeah.
Now
absolutely,
people are very delicate. Like, I feel aggrieved, which is really not the point. It's not meant to be mean-spirited.
Yeah.
If it is mean-spirited, shame on the critic.
Yeah.
That's actually not helpful. That's not, as you say, part of the elevation. That's just being vicious.
Yeah.
The other piece of this, of course, is that the dealers and the people who own the works of art already are angry actively at negative commentary. It's not just the artist who might feel, it's also the people who feel invested.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole money
Yeah, the criticism may devalue my investment, right?
So anyway, we can fix that, I think, together as a field by having more of these places that are, as you say, hubs.
Yeah.
Because then honesty will ensue.
Yeah.
If people have a drink in them and say, oh, okay,
Right.
I'm going to be honest with you, John. This thing over here needs to get this, that, or the other. And I think, as you say, that's welcome because it is a growth experience.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you can sort of put a kind of patina on it so that it doesn't feel so cruel.
And I think, in the 19th century, early 20th century, there was a lot of qualified people writing. I mean, there was a level of craft to the writing itself, where now you do have kind of a softer society, a little bit more fragile. The cancel culture is, makes it people a little bit apprehensive to put themselves out there with that opinion. But at the same time, you have the opposite of that, which is these incredibly unqualified, mean-spirited bloggers who are willing to tear anyone down over the slightest thing. And so there's these real polar opposites. And the happy medium is critical feedback with caring and craft.
Now, I must say that the critics themselves, it's a small society of them in the United States, are concerned about the death of their field and have been putting money into encouraging younger writers to get better. There are fellowships and grant programs. It tends to be, unfortunately, all cutting-edge contemporary. That world may write well now, but it's more conceptual.
Yeah.
It really isn't so much about the construction, because that has not been the central issue for a lot of these big concept people.
Are you talking about the writing is more conceptual, or what they're writing about?
Both.
Okay.
Both. So what I mean by that is, if you go to the Whitney Biennial or the New Museum Triennial, you're going to see a lot of installations, things that are meant to put across a message, as opposed to be well made, or to be beautiful, God forbid. And I think it's getting better. Like, figurative painting is returning into the mix, fortunately, and that's kind of encouraging. We could talk about that later if you want. But my point is that the conceptual stuff may be beautifully written up and beautifully described by the artist in the statement on the wall, but it's not necessarily art well made for all time. It's actually more revealing of someone's internal dialogue, or our times with a capital T. That, to me, therefore, is not helpful to our sector of the art world. That grant program that I was describing is kind of ignoring our writers. And when I say our writers, I'm thinking of people who write for Fine Art Connoisseur, who write for American Art Collector, who write for some of the magazines like Art News and Art in America, where you will see occasionally a serious article about one of, quote, our artists. Like Bo Bartlett got a big spread recently in Art in America, which was fascinating. It was really thoughtful because, he straddles that line between cutting edge and realist. Take your pick. So anyway, I feel like that's something else that some philanthropists listening to this conversation might want to put money into. Like, could there be some sort of grant or fellowship program?
In the vein of like a Robert Hughes.
Thank you. See, Robert Hughes is remembered today so fondly for being fearless about criticizing, and also highly incisive, right? He wrote so compellingly and accurately that even if he was tearing you apart, you had to respect the eye and the craft of writing.
It is very, very much in the vein of the 19th century, just so well informed. You knew it was coming from a place of deep love of art and this passion, both in his craft of writing, but in his extreme exposure to great art. You got a sense that I need to listen to this. It may be a little bit painful, but I need to listen to this because this is. I wish I were somebody who could even get on Robert Hughes' radar. Please tell me what I can do better. That's the kind of level of craft and insight that we would hope would come back. But it is true, like you say, it'll take a little bit of nurturing and bringing up a new generation that's qualified for that.
Right. When something dies out, whatever it may be, it does take nurturing, doesn't it? And we've seen that in the atelier movement. That a lot of skills that were lost or almost lost were brought back through people who volunteered or paid to have those skills returned to the canon, to the curriculum. I think that in the case of criticism, it's perfectly possible. Just like the Studio Hub thing as well. That also needs to be funded at a certain point by someone, whether it's a private philanthropist or the city government, to make it happen. These are all doable. We are awash in money in this society.
Absolutely.
There are people hunting to park their extra cash in real estate, NFTs,
Yep.
anything they can get their hands on, because cash in the bank is worthless.
Yeah.
The interest rates are -0, right? So this is an opportunity for us all to think together about what we can improve.
On top of having a major cultural impact. I mean, I know there's people that are probably a lot more governed by the love of money, and so they're looking strictly at what's going to bring the greatest return, and there's others that have made their money and are looking to give back, and potentially in a major way. And there's so many causes. I don't want to take away from child cancer or anything like that that all need support. But I think this is something, obviously, that's hugely important. When you look at the history of civilization, you look at the poets and the artists, and I think anyone that can help fund a cultural revolution, we're right on the edge of that.
And I also believe, as I get older, that revolution is incremental. That these things move awfully slowly. Very rarely do you have this kind of drop from the sky moment.
Right.
Usually that's related to a cataclysm, like World War II. I don't need that. I don't want a cataclysm. We've already had enough cataclysm recently, and it doesn't feel good. But these things can be moved forward in surprising ways.
Yeah.
And one example that I'd like to point to is the Bennett Prize. The couple in San Antonio, Stephen Allen Bennett and Elaine Melody Schmidt, are philanthropists and collectors who've created, as you know, a prize and a traveling exhibition for women figurative artists. And it's tremendous.
Yeah.
And you could do that in every category of our field. Like, I just keep saying to people, please mimic the Bennetts.
Yeah.
They're amazing because they put their money where their mouths are.
Right.
And this is good work that supports the artists directly with cash and turns museum exhibitions into traveling projects where other people in the country can see.
Yeah.
Not only the originating museum in Michigan. That is so relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of the Wall Street market. I don't mean that they're cheap. The Bennetts have put real money into it, but actually there's a whole lot more where that came from.
Relative to resources available.
Right.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of that money out in the cutting edge world. Prizes or other initiatives, acquisitions, and so on. Let's have some of that over here on our side.
Yeah, it's incredibly lopsided. Laura Barletta doing the New Salem Museum is another that I think is doing a great job putting her money where her mouth is and creating a public space for. And I think they're doing a school. I'm going up there next week, so I hope to find out a little bit more. But I believe a school is in the works with that as well.
I'm such a fan of the Barlettas and Michael Klein, and I'm so happy to see that take off soon.
Yeah. I think, talking about the incremental steps forward, the academies have certainly had a positive impact on at least the resurgence of traditional ideals in terms of craft. There's a heavy criticism that I actually share. I run an academy, graduated from the Florence Academy. They are really the only institutions that offer that deep, broad knowledge of the craft of drawing and painting in an economical, very organized way of presenting that to students. But the criticism is that it feels very robotic. It feels like all of the work is done by the same hand, which to a large degree is valid. But the bigger problem that I see is that there's no conversation within the academies about what the post-application of the skill development would be. There's no natural bridge that's built between developing a skill within a particular exercise, such as a shadow box still life for a single head portrait, and how you would then take those same skills of turning form and defining weight and controlling your color harmonies to a figure in the landscape or a multi-figure painting or a historical narrative. And without that bridge being built, unfortunately, I would say the majority of students end up kind of just mimicking the student works as their art for decades. Hopefully not decades, but up to a decade afterwards. Yeah. And And I think that's an area where initially it was necessary to just put all the focus on the craft development because it was so absent. But I think we're ready for that next iteration, which would lead us to now, what do we want to say with it? We've got to have something to say.
And that's why everything you said is 100% right. I feel like we're finally entering some maturity here where we've got decades of graduates, and can they now take that next step? And do they feel confident enough that the market is there to support them, and that the critics, as we were discussing earlier, are going to, museums or other presenting venues, so that they feel validated, and it also makes sense monetarily to do it. It is probably easier to sell a Rembrandt-esque portrait because there's an audience for that.
Yeah.
I would argue that the Whitney, God help us, is only going to take notice when we go to the next level and have something really that is well made but also conceptually fascinating or compelling. The good news is, as I said earlier, I do sense that some of those mainstream contemporary institutions, like not so much the Whitney, but I think New Museum, the ICA Boston, some others, are starting to be aware of figurative painting and by the way, sculpture, but let's focus on painting for a minute. They're putting more of it into their programming. However, it still seems to have a currency when it comes to, for example, themes of sexuality or themes of injustice. Those are topical matters that are resonant today. And that's okay. I mean, that's a way in for many audiences.
Sure.
I would argue that we've got talent galore in our universe who can go to that level with themes that matter to them, with their own issues of identity or place, or, as you say, multi-figure, because Max Ginsburg has spent decades showing us union struggles.
Amazing.
Right? I mean, incredible. Now...
But at the same time, I wouldn't say, and this is maybe a follow-up question you can get to later, but when I look at, say, Burton Silverman's work, his stuff in Montgomery and Max Ginsburg's stuff with the unions and the protests, and they haven't, to my mind, got this nearly the same kind of recognition as, say, a Bo Bartlett or a Vincent Desiderio, and or Odd Nerdrum. I'm wondering, as from an outsider looking in at New York, the harshness of daily life, to a country kid from Utah, it seems a little bit harsher. The sort of brutal nature of this big city living. I wonder how much of that seeps into the art. I wonder how much that, or how much representational painters, people whose craft, like Odd Nerdrum, is so highly developed. I wonder, and I'm sorry if I'm talking out of the side of my mouth, but it feels to some degree like it almost needs to pander to the contemporary in order for that higher level of recognition. Mm-hmm. That Burton Silverman is more of a genre, daily life, character-driven response to the people around him, whereas Odd Nerdrum has that sort of odd, chaotic, somewhat brutal conundrum of painting. What did Picasso say? The less they understood me, the more they embraced me. It's like, do you feel like figurative art has to embrace the abstract, has to include the brutal, has to have some sort of weirdness to it in order to be highly embraced, or can straightforward, like Max Ginsburg paintings that are just brilliantly rendered, well composed, but very straightforward in their message, Norman Rockwell-esque, in terms of their understandable nature. Do you think those can find that higher acceptance that the more, I guess, abstract figurative painters have found?
Right. Well, it's a great question, and it's worth thinking about. Here's a question in response. I have not seen yet anyone, including Max or Bert or a younger artist who admires those folks, depict the protest marches last year and the year before. Why is that? I mean, talk about topical.
Yeah.
Talk about young people in the streets honoring things that are right and just.
Yeah.
Things that would appeal to some viewers as reflective of our time, as somehow underscoring that momentous thing that went on, which has dissipated somewhat now. We don't see the marches like we did. Nothing.
Yeah.
Zippo. I get a lot of pictures in my inbox. Not one.
Yeah.
Why is that? So there's that question.
Sort of like the Maynard Dixon of the Depression,
Right.
or Edward Hopper, the paintings that kind of captured those moments in time.
You would think a dealer out there would say, hey, let's get to work on this because we're going to make a lot of money and we're going to get a lot of traction in the press because this reflects a moment of which many people are proud and which is exemplary. And, we haven't seen anything like it since the 1960s.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that. Okay. Now, the question of odd, and I say that, yes, there's a weirdness to Odd Nerdrum's work, which is so compelling.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on? That is always fascinating, and that will always endure, and I'm all for it. The conventionally beautiful is, in a way, problematic. That is something that a lot of modern cutting-edge people just don't want to look at because they feel they can go to the National Gallery and see it there from someone who made it a long time ago.
Right.
And we don't need any more, thank you.
The historicity is part of the appeal. If you painted the Lady of Shalott today, as beautiful as it is, as well executed as it is, do people have the same sort of connection to it once you take that history away?
Right. And of course, at its time, it was amazingly exciting because everyone knew the poetry so well and recognized that it was about women's liberation.
Right.
It was not about the medieval tale. Tennyson was a revolutionary writing poetry that held a mirror up to his time and said, you need to let women go. And let them be themselves. I mean, this woman is escaping a prison and choosing to die instead of being imprisoned anymore. That's powerful stuff.
Right.
But it doesn't matter today so much. But there are women's stories that need to be told.
That's interesting.
Motifs.
It's so interesting because in history, I know, say, for instance, with the Prix de Rome in the 19th century, you would show up. You wouldn't know the theme if you were competing. They would give you the theme that day, which means you had to know Greek mythology, you had to know biblical myth, you have to know all of the narratives, the poetry of the day, which most people. Well, maybe not most people, but maybe the buying public, the artists themselves were very well read in. Today, the narratives are different. I see people painting maybe in a little bit more Renaissance style. I see people painting in different, taking different eras or epochs in history and kind of mimicking this look, which feels... I'm sorry again if I'm being too critical, but it feels a little bit like a Renaissance fair sometimes, where it just doesn't quite feel like you're trying to deny your day. But what is the narrative of today? It's so social media driven. It's so polarized, and you're right. There's not necessarily a connection, especially again. I'm wrapped up in this academic atelier world. Especially there, where we're so focused on looking at the past masters, that it does seem like there is somewhat of a disconnect between the narratives of today and what's going on and how we might depict them, and any real desire to do that or consideration of how we would do that.
Well, again, dialogues among artists would help.
Absolutely.
That idea of get into a chat, informal, friendly, non-recorded, non-judgmental, and say, what themes interest you? And part of that is just, let's all look at a newspaper together. Let's have a chat with someone who's on the front line in any given area. And yet, we agree, I'm sure, that we never want to get too topical or too time-sensitive, because that dates very badly. We all know that, indeed, Depression-era art kind of got put aside at a certain point because it was all about, unemployment or hunger, and people didn't want to look at that. By the 1950s, they were in another mood. So, although it's an important record,
but now as we come around that, it does get a little passé as the culture moves past the sort of infancy of looking back at the past. You have people that may have lived it that don't want to relive it, and then you have the next generations that want to remember it, and so it kind of comes full circle. So, doing something, painting January 6th or painting the immigrants at the border or anything sort of topical like that will have a shining moment and then a dull moment, decades, and then it'll come back and be important when we're no longer here. It's very interesting, and I find, at least in my area where I live, the consideration is a little bit. It seems a little bit more shallow. What's going to sell? What competitions are coming up? How do I get in this gallery? Or, art largely, and you can speak to this maybe even more because you have a broader sense of it being seeing everything you do with Fine Art Connoisseur. But it seems largely the art that I love, the tradition that I'd love to adopt myself into or feel like I'm a part of. The artists just had a deeper narrative that they wanted to share. Of course, Bouguereau had his thing in painting, young girls with wings, and that some of those, as beautiful as they are, there's not a whole lot of depth to them. They are what they are.
Pot boilers.
Yeah. But Waterhouse's Lady of Shalott it used again a commonly known narrative, a commonly known poem, but the composition and the narrative was so much deeper than that. The way he posed her and the candle almost blowing out, the landscape in the background, the coolness in the air. There was so much more, I feel, that went into the consideration of making the picture that I just don't really see a lot of artists going to those depths, including myself. I'm not exempt from that. Would you say that's fair?
It's fair, absolutely. And part of this has to do with something that has come up in our figurative art convention and expo events over the years with Streamlined Publishing. We've done 3 of them, and they've gone very well. We miss them, and we want to go back to them once we're safe.
They're some of my favorite things.
Well, it's just fun to be together in the same room.
Yeah.
Talk about a hub.
Right,
400 colleagues in a ballroom together. That's kind of great.
It's like summer camp. Yeah,
it is really.
It's so great.
That has been such a joy, and we really miss that. Even though the Realism Live online programs have been great, they're not the same because it's all mosaics on a Zoom screen. The fact is that this notion of having the time to go big, to go complicated, multi-figure, to go deeply into a thought or a concept, you need funding.
Yeah.
You need the luxury of time and not churning out the pot boilers.
Absolutely.
The pretty pictures that will sell to the trade quickly. And we need, once again, philanthropists to step up and help us do that by creating programs that are guarantees that there will be income for a year while I make that masterpiece.
Yep.
Now, the masterpiece may not work as well as we hope, but you got to try.
Yeah.
And we've all heard horror stories about someone who did fund and then it didn't go well. Like something happened where the client collector was dissatisfied or didn't want to see this anymore and just paid them off and go away.
Right.
That's a bad thing. You also have situations where there's a kind of ego aspect, that this is mine and this is my picture and I will put it here at this institution and it will never leave, or that's not helpful. I think that we need to encourage philanthropists to dream in those directions. We see it happening in the cutting edge world a lot because very often it's about fashionability. That they want to be at the center of that Gagosian world, where they make a commitment and then the work is shown at Gagosian and then it goes to the Met Museum or whatever. that is something we should mimic in some way with our own content.
Yeah.
And we have ideas. But to your point, we don't seem to have enough ideas.
Yeah.
Considering how bright and thoughtful our universe is, why do we not have that overflow of themes that we can talk about? And part of that is about the dialogue and the hub thing that we're hungry for.
Well, a lot of that is like you say, it's access of opportunity. You know, a lot of it, again, I think the return of craft is still in its infancy. I mean, schools kind of started to come back in 95 to 98. Now, you know, they're really just barely 22 years old. So I think that the return of the craft being in its infancy, you have a lot of artists that from a maturity standpoint are still in their infancy in terms of their artistic development, and then the access to opportunity is less because there just isn't the same culture of patronage as there used to be, and I find that a lot of patrons don't even or buyers of art maybe not even thinking about that as an option, right? To be able to lead the art through suggestions or just saying, you know, what approaching artists and saying, if you could, what would you paint? And I think that people can start thinking about that, and then that allows the artist to kind of slow down and say, really, what are the biggest things that I could paint? Not size-wise, but thematically.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Well, I can work on that at the magazine by encouraging our readers to think in that direction. That's something that I am going to write down when we finish this conversation, because I think I could write an editorial to that point.
Right.
Or something bigger, i.e., we're often trying to put case studies in front of our readers. Like, this has already happened. Like with the Bennetts, I mentioned them before. A lot of our readers don't know that you can commission.
Yeah,
that you can say, I have a space this big, I love this theme, would you consider doing that?
Yeah.
And the artist will often say, sure, because we could have some fun with this.
Yeah.
This is not in my wheelhouse, but I can try.
Yeah.
And it often works out brilliantly because there's already a sympathy.
Yeah.
So those themes are absolutely addressable in print. To your point about how do you get away from the transactional, like the buy existing painting at the gallery.
Yeah.
The dealers have to help us on this.
Yeah.
They need to begin planting that seed
Right.
in their collectors' minds too,
Yeah.
understanding that they will get a cut.
Yeah.
Like, this is not about trying to bypass them.
Right.
It's about trying to make them part of
Yeah.
that dialogue. And dealers used to do that in the old days.
Yeah.
I mean, that was very common because they would say, oh, this is going to be something different.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it feels like, to me, most of the representational galleries are more like furniture stores than galleries, where they wait for somebody to walk in. They ask them if they have any questions. They wait for something, you know, pick out something you like, and we'll help you hang it on the wall. Right. You know, but it's not a couch. It can be something more if you tell them why the artist is important. What's the history of the artist? What are they? You know, get to know the artists. Yes. I don't know a lot of galleries that are having that dialogue with their artists. What motivates you, and what are you trying for, and what do you hope to paint, and what do you? I mean, a lot of they're good. A lot of the galleries that I've worked with have been great about not demanding particular painting, saying, give me another rose painting or whatever. You know, whatever you want to paint, I'd love to show it. So that's nice. But to know what's truly in your heart and what are themes that you'd like to pursue, and how do I help you get that? That kind of proactivity isn't common.
Well, I sympathize 100% with dealers and their concerns about retail, about the issues of consumption, that a lot of people are happy with scans and not necessarily the object itself. I mean, these are really percolating fast for those dealers. I'm not trying to badmouth them, but I agree with you. Actually, I would argue the key to their future success might be thinking outside the momentary transaction toward more meaningful dialogues.
Right.
Because then the collector is not just a customer, but is a partner.
Yeah.
And the artist becomes a partner too.
Right.
And doesn't just trade up once they get a name. A lot of this is happening even in the cutting edge world. The art newspaper every month is full of fashionable artist has moved from Gagosian to Hauser and Wirth, or Hauser and Wirth to Gagosian, because all of a sudden things took off. And they felt like, oh, I now have the standing that I can go to this other place where they're going to treat me better or whatever.
Right.
I'm not trying to get into those details, but I think that you want that dealer gallery to feel that this is a partnership and something where we can grow together.
Yeah.
And we will both benefit. And by the way, the customers will too.
Right.
That they're going to feel special.
Ideally, not just from a monetary standpoint, but from a culturally rich, artistic merit standpoint. How do we create the great works that will define our generation? In the same way that artists aren't necessarily thinking about that, dealers aren't necessarily thinking about, collectors aren't necessarily thinking about that, and it's something that certainly we could hopefully plant that seed and maybe grow the conversation towards that. I think as much as we're in the infancy of the resurgence of craft and the resurgence of the potential cultural importance of art making, like you said, when patrons, if they do reach out to commission certain things, I've done a painting, like you mentioned, that it didn't quite turn out the way I'd hoped. It wasn't as masterful as I thought it would be. I took on a project that I knew was beyond me. I told the collector right up front before we agreed, this is how much it's going to cost. It's going to take me probably up to 2 years. And I got to tell you, I'm not good enough to do this. I was very upfront with him. I don't have the skills to do this. This first 6 months, all I did was studies, and I tried to kind of up my game in terms of my painting ability. I just dropped everything and just said, how do I live up to this? How do I get some of these skills? And in the end, it was like 80% good. But there's these moments in the painting that clearly don't work, and it's frustrating. But it was as good as I could do at the time. I learned a lot. I could do it twice as fast and 10 times as good now. But I think that might be part of it. Is saying, here's someone who has that passion, who I think has that potential. I'm gonna, and maybe that's where it's not necessarily a individual patronage, although it could be. Maybe it's like a prize, where it's an opportunity. You're providing an opportunity, and give us your ideas, feed us your ideas. We'll choose the idea we like best, and then the results are less important than the experience. The prize would offer you the experience, and then you're not worried about whether the patron likes it or not. It's just like, let me help you get better. Let me support this development.
Amen. And there's so much private money out there that could do that.
Yeah.
I will call out, the Salmagundi Club of New York has been doing some great work in that direction recently. It is sort of into a new level of energy with new board members and growing membership.
Yeah.
You may have read the article in the magazine recently about Noah Buchanan being commissioned.
Right. Yeah, I just saw the doors.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And so that project is a reminder of something that is very specific. It is a kind of prize. There was a competition in the old way, like the French did it all the time in the 19th century. Yeah. And the competitors came up with wonderful things, but Noah apparently, according to the jury, had the best, and the result is marvelous. And that is something that is exciting for everybody because it is a creative challenge. It's also for all time because those doors will remain in place for a century more, if not longer. And it gets the heart pumping. That all of a sudden people can visualize what you just said about these challenges that can be managed. I mean, it was something in the range of, I don't know, 5 figures maybe? Maybe it was 6 figures. I'm not even sure. But that's not a lot of money in this day and age.
Right.
And what
but to an artist, the opportunity is, we were talking earlier about this TV show I'm trying to get going. We started in Paris last year. To me, the $120,000 investment is significant. It's going to take me time. It puts me in a position where it limits a lot of other things. It's a project, though, I feel like I have to do. But in the grand scheme, it's like you said, lunch.
Absolutely.
And $100,000 for somebody to slow down, cover all their bases, go through all the necessary effort, the sketches, the preliminary efforts, is so significant. When I had that 2 years to do that painting, I've never been more stressed, but it was the kind of stress that I crave. It was something that the whole time I felt like, I wish I could do this every time.
Yeah.
I'd love to make every painting as significant as possible.
Right.
I'd love to get maybe away from things that I feel a little bit more decorative.
Right.
And but the access to opportunity just is it's a limiting factor.
And indeed, I think a mix of the two is lovely for an artist's career, to have some, I call them pot boilers, I don't mean that literally, but the idea of something that is satisfying because you're good at it, you can move it along, you get into more collections, and you have some notoriety with a show, solo show, whatever, and then you have the big project that is kind of going deeper. That is healthy. And I feel the same way. I mean, the magazine, of course, comes up 6 times a year. It is terrific because I'm learning all the time. It is, however, with a deadline. There has to be an end. It has to print on a certain day.
Yeah.
Unlike my exhibition projects, where they can be many years in progress. And that's okay, because that's more challenging, I guess you could say, creative, a little bit more laborious, sometimes maddening, because you're waiting for loan requests to be answered and so on. But, that is a different kind of energy.
Yeah.
And both are valuable. You want the regularity, and you also want that kind of unpredictable, bigger than I think I can actually manage feeling.
Yeah.
That's where you grow.
Right.
That's where you really start to see results.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just talking to my daughter about that. She was, I have I have 4 daughters and a son, but, they get those moments of frustration. My 13-year-old, I coach her in basketball, and there's some things she wasn't understanding, some plays she wasn't understanding, or positions. And she's on 2 teams. She's on a more serious team, and then I coach the rec league. But the more serious team, they've got plays, they've got their lingo, and she's like, I just don't understand it. And ask questions. I don't want to ask questions. I don't understand. And I'm like, well, not understanding, it's okay. She's like, sometimes I just want to cry, and I'm like, that's okay. Because those are the moments of frustration where you're just about to understand something. You're kind of confronting something that it's uncomfortable because you don't quite get it, but you're on the verge. If you stick with it, you're right there on the verge. And so
here.
It is uncomfortable. That's the stress of the project I did was everything is unknown. I'll just go do another invented landscape. I need to take a break and just breathe again with the stuff that I'm comfortable with. Sure. But the comfort is uncomfortable at a certain point too, right? You want that challenge. You want to get to the things that you don't quite understand, and then ideally you have the community to help you overcome yourself.
Well, that's a great asset, a great tool to get to your result. I mean, obviously there has to be the independent authenticity, and then there has to be the community that's kind of weighing in gently on how to make it better, and also giving you ideas that you don't even realize you're sleeping on.
Yeah.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
When somebody says something and a week later you're like, oh, now I see how I can relate that to me.
Right.
It takes time.
Yeah.
It's not instant. But you wouldn't have gone there if it weren't for that mention.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
We need that. And, people always tell me, oh, I get that online. No, you do and you don't. It doesn't resonate in the same way.
Yeah.
And I think that will always be the downside of online and virtual.
Right.
That they have such value, and they are so now precious to me since the pandemic started as a way to keep in touch and learn more. But let's go back to in-person as soon as we can, too. We're starting to, but it's pretty spotty.
Yeah.
I mean, for every event I've gone to, 3 have been canceled.
Yeah.
And that's true of the last year.
Right.
It's been so maddening.
Yeah.
Like, enough. But I understand why. I get it.
Sure.
We will eventually come out of this. But, we don't ever want to forget what it is to be with other people, with original works of art or objects of any kind.
Yeah.
and in places that inspire us. I mean,
Yeah.
we all know the tropes. Go to Italy, the light is different. Yeah, it is.
It is.
You need to go see that.
Yeah.
You know, it isn't just, oh, great museums.
Yeah.
Because you can see all those objects online better
Right.
than in the room.
Yeah.
But the fact is you need to be in the presence of
Yeah.
them. There's something extra.
You have to taste the tomatoes in Italy. They
Correct.
are different. It's absolutely these.
That's right.
These things are absolutely true. Yeah, especially with the visual arts, being able to. I know a lot of schools are going online. I'm likely closing my own school. But I've hesitated to do the Patreon thing or teach online because I understand it's so limited, and I've always felt like if somebody's coming to you as a student, you need to be as honest with them as possible about what's required to gain these skills. And online learning for art specifically is incredibly limiting. And there's only so far you can critique something online.
Yeah,
there's only so
value.
much you can appreciate something
Sure.
visual online.
Yeah, and that's why I feel so hamstrung, when I hear that a new acquisition has been displayed at a museum and I can't get there because
Yeah.
of travel restrictions, or
Right.
a show is only online because the artist couldn't get the work to the destination. So maddening. And again, short term. However, let's just say it one more time. These habits that we have formed should not become permanent.
Yeah.
That's so important. I don't want to hear funders saying, "Oh well, it was so much easier online. Let's
Right.
just keep it that way."
Right.
Oh no.
Right.
No. Not hybrid. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Where it's appropriate, but let's not abandon the
Yeah.
in-person experience.
Yeah, I am afraid of where the academies are going, or the potential for this to stick.
I'm afraid so. Yeah.
Because you can make more money because your audience is larger. Students don't have to relocate. And so you now have a global audience of people that can participate, but the participation is absolutely limited.
Great.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to go, speaking of the Salmagundi Club, did you see the figure exhibition?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's nice.
Oh my gosh, I'm so pleased for everybody involved. I mean, I was just so blown away.
Yeah.
And by the way, the upper gallery with the accepted works, but then the junior gallery downstairs.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great. Yeah.
I mean, these were the younger emerging artists.
Right.
And they were terrific.
Yeah.
So we are on to something here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly the point, that Salmagundi is a really marvelous venue for
Right.
showing the work. And also, it confirmed my hope that what we've been discussing is slowly happening.
Yeah.
That there is the ambition and the breaking across boundaries, but we need to expedite it.
Right.
And also, we need to make them bigger, more compelling.
Yeah.
As we said, that takes time.
Yeah.
This is, in some cases, work that was already made for other reasons.
Yeah.
It wasn't explicitly made
Sure,
for this
sure.
show. So,
Yeah.
but I'm so glad for that team.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good place to wrap it up. Is the future's bright. We have a lot of potential, and I think that the job that you're doing with Fine Art Connoisseur and bringing such a beautiful publication to the masses and sharing it as widely as you do, writing about it so eloquently, being as involved as you are. You're one of the great champions of what we're doing. So,
Thank you. Love
yeah,
it.
I
love it.
appreciate.
You keep doing what you do, please.
Yes,
Keep making art.
I can't help it. I wouldn't know what to do. The only other skill I have is collecting carts at Costco, but it doesn't pay as well. But yeah, thank you so much for letting me come in and spending some time. And we've got this amazing Waterhouse.
There it is. That's it.
That's your guy. Please, if anybody doesn't have the Peter Trippi book on Waterhouse, is it still available?
It is out of print, but it is still easily available on Amazon to buy used.
Okay.
Like, I in many cases, they're new copies.
Okay.
So it's just, I don't know what happened with the publisher. It was 2002 that the book came
Yeah.
out. So that is 20 years,
Yeah.
I'm amazed to say. So in that regard, I'm not hurt
Yeah.
that they took it out of print.
It's the best book on Waterhouse available. There's not a lot available, and he's my favorite artist. So I pull that book out all the time and point to, there's so many great illustrations, unfinished works, and drawings, and great reproductions in the book. and pick up Fine Art Connoisseur for sure. Attend, if you can, the FACE conference when it comes back, the Plein Air conference.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for supporting what we do, and we support you. And anything we can do to further this dialogue, we're totally in.
Yeah.
We want it.
Yeah.
So, good luck.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And that's it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Ciao.